today we remember the late struggle stalwart, Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. It's 3 years since her passing, and Winnie is remembered for her role in the fight against apartheid and pushing for the rights of women. But to reflect on the life of the struggle hero, we're now joined by Gail Smith from the Soul City Institute. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Smith. We heard from the President this morning talking about, a woman who was fearless, a woman who was a quintessential activist, a woman who was never afraid, rather, to speak her mind. How do you remember the late stalwart, that's Winnie Madikizela-Mandela?
Well, Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was the greatest revolutionary this country has ever known, and is the revolutionary that we have never acknowledged and recognized in the entirety of her contribution to our liberation struggle. She stands head and shoulders above everyone, and yet she is really the official figure that we never recognize. And while I acknowledge what the President has said, I think words are meaningless because we haven't really recognized Winnie's substantial contribution, which spanned practically 8 decades of her life and of this country's history. She fought every successive regime, every successive prime minister, every successive police minister. She fought all of them over practically 4 decades of her life. And as a country, we do not recognize her contribution in its entirety. So that's how I think we should begin to remember her as the greatest revolutionary this country has ever seen.
Right. I went through your article dating back to 2018, idolized, immobilized and vilified. What stood out for me is that even though, most around the world did look up to Winnie and did feel that Winnie played quite a significant role in the fight against apartheid, the media, particularly even international media, on the other hand, played a role in vilifying her, but also sort of shaping her public image of one of quite a rebel, one that does not necessarily listen to being a domesticated wife. I could go on and on and on, but you worded so profoundly in terms of how international media played a role in the vilifying of Winnie.
Well, that was started in South Africa with Stratcom, and that was a very conscious and deliberate attempt to smear her globally. And of course, it was completely gendered, it was completely politicized, it was completely planned. Winnie was a project. She was a project of a successive systems of white men who were committed to white supremacy, and Winnie stood in opposition to them. And so that global image of her was created in this country by the media in this country. It was then taken by Stratcom and sent out into the world that accepted it without any criticism, because they understood that the way you destroy a woman, in particular a mother, the way you destroy a mother is to associate a mother with the killing of a child. And so the Stompie Sipay murder was set up, it was calculated, and it was determined that it would destroy her, because Winnie had done what no one had ever done before. She had successfully, politically and strategically displaced the Afrikaner ideal of a volksmoeder with this completely revolutionary idea of the mother of the nation. And they knew they couldn't kill her physically. They tried. They tried several times. They bombed her car. They tried several times to kill her, and failing to kill her physically, they decided to kill her strategically in terms of the theories of mothering. How do you destroy a mother? You associate her with the death of a child. And so that's how the media then does destroy her credibility globally.
Let's juxtapose then to what the Evening Standard did back in March of 15th, 1995. You quote this as well in your article, and it quotes here that she spoke the language of the dispossessed, which is what the dispossessed wanted to hear in this country. Of 40 million people, there are an awful lot who were dispossessed. So at one end, we might have had the media trying to tarnish her brand, almost having quite an intention there. But on the other hand, even being referred to as the mother of the nation, still living within her community of Soweto, she still was relatable to the ordinary South African on the ground going through hardships, and she wanted to remain there with her people.
Well, it's not about relatability. She did the time. Winnie Mandela's activism started when she was 19 years old and she qualified as a social worker. She was active in the community. Her political activism preceded Nelson Mandela's, her meeting of him. Her activism covered all the decades of her, of her life. So I think that there isn't a real understanding of the fact that everything about her life, including her career as a social worker, because you need to remember, Verwoerd was the father of social work in South Africa. Winnie Mandela, in terms of her role both as a social worker and a political activist, stood in direct opposition to what Verwoerd wanted to establish, this ideal white South Africa, and where we recognize Mandela as a lawyer and therefore using law as an instrument to fight. We never recognize Winnie's social work and the fact that she revolutionized social work, because Verwoerd's idea was that he would take one rural native and see if you could educate her. And that one rural native happened to be Winnie Madikizela. Right? It was that one native that gets that one spot that the system creates for a rural native. And this one rural native comes into the school and she exceeds all of the expectations. And for the entire career, she uses social work as a political tool to fight apartheid for her entire career. And we never acknowledge that aspect of her.
Yeah, speaking of acknowledgement, before I let you go then, I mean, her granddaughter, Zamaswazi Mandela Dlamini, spoke about how, her grandmother, Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, told her that, you know what, tell my story, but also after telling my story, tell more stories of other South African women that have shaped the country, that have done such remarkable work in seeing the South Africa that we have today. How do you think, Gail Smith, we should acknowledge, the contribution of Winnie Mandela 3 years after her passing?
Well, I think that it's out of our hands. What happened when Winnie died was that there was an unplanned, leaderless uprising of particularly young black women who said, not on our watch will you destroy this woman. So there is an incredible movement and body of black women, young black women in particular, who are preserving her legacy, who are theorizing her existence, who are making art, and who are putting her back into the canon of greatness in this country. And that we are Winnie girls because we don't wait for the state or people or men to do things. We do things ourselves. And so when Winnie died, you saw women rise up in this country, change a global narrative on Winnie Mandela. And you see these global networks of women now, and some men who are completely dedicated to restoring the dignity, the history, and the contribution of Winnie Mandela. And that's a direct consequence of Winnie's work. You could not have the girls who go to the camps in the 70s, 1976, without Winnie Mandela. So I think that Winnie always said, my people will vindicate me. She said it. She never sought to be loved. She never sought office. She sought to serve. And she said in 491, she said, I'm writing this because I want people to know. And she said, my people will vindicate me. And we are, and we will continue to do so.
And you remind me of that slogan back in 2018 of women around the world saying, Winnie did not die, she multiplied. Gail Smith, thank you so much for your time this morning.